Popcorn Junkies, welcome to this epic review of a truly epic film. This is a review of The Brutalist, Brady Corbet's The Brutalist. It's a massive deal, this film. It's a hot favourite to win potentially Best Picture at the Oscars, Best Director. Adrien Brody and Felicity Jones are both in there as potentially on track to win Best Actor, Best Actress. It's a massive film, this. It's epic in scale, epic in reach, epic in feel, epic in thematics. It's a big movie with big aspirations. And a big heart. It has a big heart. It clocks in at a staggering 3.5 hours long. And the viewing I went to also included, almost sort of tailored into the film, if you like, sewn into the film, a 15-minute interlude. So don't be put off if you go and see it and you've got a weak bladder. There is an opportunity, and there is 15 minutes in the middle after about 2 hours 5 minutes where you can actually leave and go to the loo. But this is truly a cinematic film shot on VistaVision. This stars Adrien Brody. Adrien Brody I like. I mean, he infamously won the Oscar for his role in The Pianist, and I think his role in this has many sort of parallels and echoes of his performance in that controversially Roman Polanski directed film. This also stars Felicity Jones as his wife, and she very much features in the second half, if you like, of this film. It stars Guy Pearce, who's just generally a brilliant character actor, as in a sense the sort of benefactor, the Guggenheim-like guy, the guy who's kind of in and of himself culturally bereft, but has got loads of money, is an exemplar of capitalism. It also stars Joe Alwyn as Guy Pearce's son, and Alessandro Nivola is in there too. What's it about? It feels like this is based on a real life story. I said when we looked at the trailers, this is so detailed, and it's curious. It is so detailed in its portrayal of a character in quite a niche area, architecture, coming to America, and it's all parked within the realness and the real-timeness, if you like, of post-Holocaust, post-World War II Germany, Hungary. He's Hungarian, he's a Holocaust survivor, and he's managed to get out of Europe, and he's managed to get to America. So it's a migrant story, it's an immigrant story, it's a Holocaust story, it's very much a Jewish story, laced into here are the real world events of the birth of Israel, the establishment of Israel as a state. And so for all of that, you sort of think, good God, is this a real person? Is this Laszlo Toth? Is he a real person? No, he's not a real person. This has all come from the mind and the creativity of Brady Corbet. It's like a book. This is like a work of literature. It has, characters are drawn in such a detailed fashion. Adrien Brody is pretty much on screen for the entire film, and it follows the arc. Let's try and do it in a sort of like really quick snapshot. He arrives on his own. He's had to leave his wife. He's had to leave his niece back in Europe. He lands in America. He hooks up with his cousin, who's played by Alessandro Nivola, who's already established a furniture store in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, getting a commission to do a job for a low price in a incredibly rich capitalist businessman's home, a library, and in the design of that library inadvertently becomes discovered as quite a seismic and sensational architect in and of his own right, who had created and designed buildings in Europe, in Hungary, and has been lost, if you like, in the aftermath of World War II, and finds himself washed up in the States, having lost, if you like, all his qualifications and all of his cachet and all of his kudos has kind of gone, because he's just a migrant. He's just one of many migrants. And so he has this moment. And again, this is an interesting film about the American dream. He has his American dream moment where he is found, if you like, he's picked up. He's kind of, Guy Pearce, who's the capitalist, who eventually takes him under his wing, decides to build a monument to his Guy Pearce's dead mum, and Laszlo Toth, Adrien Brody's the man to design it. And therein lies a tale or two, both a great thing for Laszlo Toth and an awful thing. This is the American dream literally ignites for him, and we watch across the arc of this film the American dream, in a sense, just melt away and dissolve into something really corrosive and quite sinister and horrible. The American dream is a dream that works for a certain type of American. And it's a very interesting film, this, about how if you're not quite the right type, then no amount of skill, creativity, artistry or commitment are you going to be able to kind of break through and achieve the success that perhaps you deserve or would like. I think this is a film also about how his Jewishness and his otherness and his migrantness. It's interesting that throughout this film, as he moves through his journey in the American dream of becoming an architect and a successful architect in America, alongside him he has a black assistant. Only a certain type, can get so far. If you're a migrant, you can only get so far. And yet, the American dream is about, anyone can succeed, everyone can succeed. And this is very much about a time in American history when that really wasn't the case. Let's talk about the opening of the film. The opening of the film is sensational. It has that tick-tock music that we know from the trailer. It's an incredibly atmospheric introduction and arrival for Adrien Brody. What I loved about it was handheld, it was dark, it was confused, it was jumbly, it was disorientating, it was stressful, but at the same time there was a kind of excitement to them coming up from the lower levels of a boat. And as he appears, you've seen the shot in the trailer. There's the kind of upside down vision of the Statue of Liberty. And I think what's lovely about that as a kind of poetic image to hold in your heart and in your mind is that really the whole film, Statue of Liberty, a symbol of this great country of freedom and dreams and opportunities, and if you want to, you can, and if you can, you will, and all that kind of stuff. The Statue of Liberty, liberty, and yet at the same time it's on a Dutch angle and it's on the side and it's upside down. It's skew-whiff. And I think this film is about how the American dream is skew-whiff. And so it's no kind of coincidence that the Statue of Liberty on the posters and everything else is like that. It's upside down. It's not a conventional, neat, easy, tidy, beautiful look at what America is. He really has to struggle his way into his cousin's life, his furniture store. Interesting. I thought really powerful kind of opening scenes there between him and Alessandro Nivola's character, who plays his cousin, where Alessandro Nivola's character, the cousin who's already in America, who looks after Adrien Brody, he's changed his surname. It's no longer Hungarian. It's an American name. He's even called his company Something and Sons, and as he says, that's because Americans love the idea that it's kept in the family. He's got a Catholic wife. So you can see Adrien Brody reading this and thinking, my God, you've completely denied and kind of turned your back on everything that made you what you were from where you were. But again, is that the American dream? Is the only way you can get a sort of purchase in America to essentially adopt everything that's American. So yes, migrants can come, but don't be what you are as a migrant. You have to become American. I think there's a potency to that idea right now in America. Yes, we're open to all and we're welcome to all as long as you become us fully and legally. Quite explicit sex in here. He goes and sees a prostitute. None of it's kind of gratuitous. You just feel that sort of need for contact and connection and intimacy. He's a man on his own, a migrant, away from everything. That desire and need for some kind of human connection. I thought Adrien Brody did a really good job, and I think the film does a really good job of presenting an isolated migrant clutching at something for some kind of familiarity and comfort. He finds some of that comfort with his cousin, but only for so long. There's a very curious, stressful scene where his cousin they're getting drunk at the store and they're dancing together with his cousin's Catholic wife. And there's the feeling that his cousin's sort of saying to him, go on, give her a kiss, and she's being treated like an object. And it's all very discomforting, and you're sort of thinking, oh God, what's going on here? Is it going to become a threesome or a wife swap? Or it's all a bit doobie. But anyway, it's whilst working for him that he meets, or the son of Guy Pearce comes in and says, we want to do a surprise, we want to design a library. And so he goes off and designs this Brutalist library. His design, his eye for design as an architect there's a lovely line that he delivers somewhere in the film where he says, the most interesting thing about a cube isn't the cube, but it's how the cube has been made. And that's a really good grab. And if you imagine that this has been written, this isn't based on a book or anything, that's a really good grab on what brutalism as an architectural form or art form is. It's like, yes, it's putting the functionality of what makes something stand up, it's making that the thing itself, so you can see the very nuts and bolts of what makes a building, and we turn them into something aesthetic. So he goes in and he designs this library, and it's all brilliant and it looks astonishing. But Guy Pearce wasn't aware that this was happening. He's very cross. He throws him out. He goes to sue Adrien Brody's cousin's company, and so Alessandro Nivola's character, Adrien Brody's cousin, throws him out. So suddenly he's not even got his cousin to live with. Meanwhile, we discover he's got a drug addiction. He starts to take heroin. And Guy Pearce comes back and finds him. Guy Pearce's character is interesting. He's this benefactor. He's this, you could argue, almost a philanthropist. He wants to make a mark. He's got money. He decides that he wants to use Adrien Brody, Laszlo Toth, to design and make a sort of huge kind of building, temple almost, in dedication to Guy Pearce's dead mother. And therein lies really the mainstay of this film. And I wasn't really expecting it to be just focused on one thing. I thought we were going to watch the evolution of a man's career, but actually it really is. This film is about the attempts to construct and build and create this amazing kind of monolith, if you like, on a hillside. At times, there were sort of moments in this film where it felt a little bit like There Will Be Blood, the sort of one man's hubris, one man's egotistical, narcissistic desire to achieve something, Guy Pearce, and how he uses a sort of an artist in the form of Adrien Brody to realise his dreams. And really the reason Guy Pearce is driven is Guy Pearce knows he's got no talent, he knows he's got no skill, he knows he's got no creativity, and that ultimately he's having to lean on everyone else for all of his wealth and all of his success. All the way through this, you're feeling Guy Pearce is this, he can't be this. It was horrible when he threw Adrien Brody out of the house at the beginning, but then even when he comes back to him, you're kind of yearning for Guy Pearce to be nice. He shows evidence of being nice, but he does a very good job, Guy Pearce, of kind of lacing into even his acts of generosity the threat that he could take it away at any point. And I think that's a really important aspect of Guy Pearce, because I think that's an aspect of America to migrants and immigrants, and that perhaps America kind of wants to say, yes, you can come here, but we have the strength and the opportunity to take away your freedom when and if we choose to. And I think the whole film really is a metaphor for the migrant experience, the idea of come here, prop up our capitalist system, be instrumental and artistic in defining our artistry, our buildings, the look, the feel, our culture. But don't for a minute get comfortable with it. Don't for a minute get comfortable with it, and don't for a minute think you're going to be able to receive the rewards or the fruits of your labour. You might get paid a wage, but we're in control. And I think if you go into this film thinking, okay, well, it's very much a film just about a building site, because it really is kind of, in essence, about a building site. It's also a film, I would say, of two halves, but it's not really. It's a film of a front 2 hours before the interval, and then an hour afterwards. And the weird thing about that as a device is I found the front 2 hours infinitely more rewarding than I did the last hour. And I've got a terrible confession to make. I think part of the reason for that was the arrival of his wife. Now, for the whole front 2 hours of the film, he's struggling with drug addiction, he's thrown out by his cousin, he's been taken under the wings of a benefactor, Guy Pearce. It's volatile. He could be, it could be taken away from him at any time. As I say, he's got drug addiction. He hasn't got much money, but he's also an artist, and he's been given this great big opportunity. The only thing lacking in his life is his wife isn't with him. And you feel that. You feel his yearning desire to have his family complete. I mean, it's his wife and his cousin. And his niece. They don't have children together. But I have to be honest, after the interval, Felicity Jones arrives, his wife, and I think partly this was the idea. She's a humourless woman. And Adrien Brody did a really good job of clearly really wanting her back and desiring her presence. And, through the help of lawyers that are close to Guy Pearce, they managed to get her over to America. But he also did quite a good job, and I don't know if this was intentional, of when she arrived, almost being immediately depleted. She arrives, she's in a wheelchair, she's got osteoporosis due to the famine and the lack of food out in Europe. Obviously, she's not cheery because she's gone through hell, but she really isn't cheery. And you immediately feel that what he was expecting her to be, we've had it parked earlier in the film, that he likes sex, he's lusty. She doesn't deliver him what he necessarily wants, and so there's an aspect of disappointment there. I think what's interesting though is the disappointment of Felicity Jones. She's good, but I found her so unsympathetic and so undesirable through the eyes of him. I just thought she just felt like a massive killjoy. Now, I think that was the point. But it does serve to kind of neuter somewhat the energy. There felt like there was a huge energy and verve to the front 2 hours of this film. And then as soon as Felicity Jones arrives, and then as soon as you've got this new dynamic of him essentially catering for a wife, it sounds terrible, but the film itself became, I thought, quite cliched and quite predictable and not as nuanced and not as layered as it was in the first 2 hours. Now, that's not to say there weren't some great scenes. I mean, one of my favourite scenes towards the end of this film is one of the most crucial scenes where, there's the build is on, the build is off. Guy Pearce throws complete strops. The budget's going through the roof. Adrien Brody has huge tugs of war with Guy Pearce and then another architect that's brought on because they need to bring the price down and the cost. He wants Carrara marble, is it? And that's just too expensive and all this kind of stuff. His design, Adrien Brody's very proud of his design, but then suddenly this kind of American architect is brought in who's designed a department store who wants to clip this and move this and knock the height down and all that malarkey. So you've got that striving, straining desires of the artist tugging against the finances, if you like, and also the control issues that Guy Pearce has got. But within even all of that, there's one moment where they do head out to Italy and they go into the kind of marble quarry. And I thought this was an incredibly impressive and intoxicating and hallucinogenic sequence of being in these strange kind of cavernous kind of areas where there's huge blocks of marble that have been, mined and cut out from this quarry, and this is where they pour water on it, and it becomes really sort of granite and stone and mineral and the earth and what are we made of, and we're just humans, and Guy Pearce is there with Adrien Brody and Adrien Brody's old friend from Italy, and they're moving around looking for a piece of marble, but then they end up going for drinks and having a party, and Adrien Brody essentially gets off with this woman. And then the most disturbing scene in the film occurs, and this is a spoiler review, guys. Guy Pearce's character rapes Adrien Brody's, whilst Adrien Brody is really almost comatose, but not quite. On heroin and alcohol. So does it all work? This is the question. Does it all work? As I say, the attention to detail, the attention to building this fictional career and this fictional life in the front 2 hours, I thought was excellent. I thought it was sensational. I thought Adrien Brody was good. I have to say, I don't know how to take the information that I was given that both his and Felicity Jones's Hungarian accents were helped along the way with AI tweaking their vowels or replacing their vowels to make it a little bit more Hungarian, because there were some times actually, and I felt this before knowing this detail of this story, there were times where I thought they're not too Hungarian, but it was just almost like there was something a bit over the top about it. It didn't feel quite naturalistic, which is weird to then have this story that AI was used to help them along. I didn't find Felicity Jones engaging, sympathetic. I mean, she's meant to be a harsh, hard, tough character, but I didn't, and that's fine. You're not supposed to like every character in a film, but I couldn't even relate to her as being this sort of problem for him. I just found her a pain in the neck. I found her annoying. I found her insipid. I found her a drain. I found her like she's one of those, what do they say? So people who can walk into a room and they suck it dry of energy. I found her annoying, and I didn't blame Adrien Brody to want to kind of dive deeper into his heroin and escape. Guy Pearce, I think, is interesting. I think he's good. But there were many times in the film, I don't know if anyone else felt this, where, for example, there's a long protracted scene where he's describing his relationship with his mum and stories from his youth when he was younger to Adrien Brody at a party. And a lot of it was very explicatory. It was a lot of explication, a lot of explaining. I almost felt sometimes that, yes, he was that sort of upper echelons, quite formal, but he almost overdid it, and there was no light and shade to even Guy Pearce. I felt that malevolence and evil was coming our way. He did a good job, and I think the script did a good job of keeping that just simmering beneath the surface, his disregard, his idea. Because at the moment, in the scene where he actually rapes Adrien Brody, it's a seething, and it's not in close-up, but it's disturbing. It's accompanied with a seething sort of monologue of nastiness as he does the deed to Adrien Brody, and it's very disturbing, very dark. You think of everything Adrien Brody's character's gone through, and you think, oh my God, now you've got this horrid, horrid man on top of you. Nice details in this from Joe Alwyn, who played Guy Pearce's son, because there's this big moment towards the end of the film where Felicity Jones goes in and says, "You raped my husband," basically. And Joe Alwyn goes into this, who's the son, who's also been a bit of an arse. I was sort of getting young Donald Trump vibes from him. I don't know whether that was a kind of source of inspiration for him performing, but he was the guy who booked Adrien Brody and his cousin to do the library as a surprise for Guy Pearce, his dad. But the great scene when there's this big reveal and there's this big kind of denouement where she says to them, you raped my husband, and Joe Alwyn starts to cry. And so it's clearly suggested that Joe Alwyn has perhaps been himself the victim of sexual assault from his father or whatever. You know, they've all lived under the oppression of this monstrous individual in the form of Guy Pearce. And really everything that Guy Pearce has been about with Adrien Brody, his character, this has been about sort of improving his own self-image through the talent of Adrien Brody. But even Guy Pearce can't get past his own limitations, his own lacks. So what does he do? He actually has sex with Adrien Brody. He punishes him. He controls him. He wants to show that ultimately he calls the shots. And really this is a film about how ultimately those in control in capitalist America call the shots. Cinematically, it was gorgeous. Once we got away from the kind of opening theme tune, a lot of the music throughout this was incredibly engaging. I liked its decision to use sort of some archive material. An enormous amount of care and consideration and thought has gone into this film. It's an incredibly meticulously and attentively constructed film. It looks beautiful, it sounds beautiful, it has a lot of poetry in it. It allows you to sit there and kind of interpret and read into things. It allows you to breathe. There are musical interludes. There are shots that just sit for shot's sake. It very much presents to us the America that we're seeing now in the form of Donald Trump and all his acolytes who are wanting any kind of migration to be kind of held back. It's an interesting film that reminds you that America was built by the disenfranchised, whether it be, the slaves or whether it then be the migrants that were essentially paid slaves in a sense, weren't they? My only issue with this film, I think, I could not get on board with, I found Felicity Jones infinitely unlikable. I found her unlikable, I found her unsympathetic, I found her difficult to identify with. I found it difficult to understand what he even saw in her. Now, perhaps what was at work here is that she was something very different before he left and came to America, and perhaps that all the experiences of Europe had changed her. I think that could have been made more evident. I think it would have been, I don't think we needed a flashback to when she was something else, but I found it really hard to empathize with her experience, her struggle, her pain, because her disability really gets the better of her. He uses morphine to kind of treat her, and it's a great opportunity for him to take it himself. And whilst Adrien Brody is very, very good, there's still something about the film that held me back. I don't think it, in the final analysis, I'm not entirely convinced it achieved whatever it was setting out to achieve. Whilst I think the first 2 hours were moving at a steady, constructive, almost in architectural terms, the architecture was being well built and well placed, and the foundations were firm. Once we got into the latter hour of the film, it seemed to speed up and become quite dislocated. And this was accelerated, I think, by the introduction of his wife, that threw a spanner in the works a bit too much. And then the drama of Guy Pearce and the whole marble, quarry scene, which I thought was incredibly powerful, incredibly abstract and haunting. It was haunting. That was the mainstay of that latter part of the film. But then the tie-up, the epilogue, I just found it all a little bit too neat and too conventional in a sense. It was almost like it took all this time building this epic story and all these characters, and then it just rapidly fizzled out. And so I was kind of left feeling a little bit robbed at the end. I felt like I'd been asked to invest an enormous amount of time into this world, these people, this film. And I didn't really feel I got to know much more about Laszlo Toth, Adrien Brody's character, by the end. He kind of doesn't change much in his arc. He's kind of at the same place at the end that he was at the beginning. There was something strangely claustrophobic, which in the first half helped the thematics, but then in the second half just felt irritating and discomforting. So it was a curious film. I wouldn't say it was boring. It's quite an arse to sit for 3.5 hours. There's always something of interest going on. But I massively and rapidly lost all of my invested emotional interest in Adrien Brody the longer we had Felicity Jones on camera. And I know she's being lauded for this being the role of a lifetime and she's being nominated for an Oscar. I don't necessarily think it's what she did. I just don't... She knocked the symmetry of this film off its axis. She knocked it off centre. Something went wrong with the introduction of her character, and I can't quite fathom what that was. It can't be just as simply as not liking her, because she theoretically was one half of Laszlo Toth's life, but I didn't like her. And I didn't like her not because of her. I didn't like her being in the film. She got in the way of other themes, I think, which sounds awful. So all in all, if I was to score this, what would I give it? I'd probably give this 70 out of 100. I think it aimed high, and it kind of got there for 2/3 of it, and then it just rapidly kind of fell apart towards the end for me. And the epilogue at the very end, I just found really quite disappointing, and I wasn't quite sure what we were supposed to make of it, really. It didn't hit me hard. I wasn't hit hard at the end in the way that I had been hit hard right up until the point of the interval. Final thought I would also like to say was I was looking forward to really engaging with the whole brutalist aesthetic. We have it at the beginning of the film, but I think the film loses track of... It's called The Brutalist, and in a sense, it's playing on the idea that America is brutal with those that come in. Guy Pearce is the brutalist. He's a brute. He's brutal. And then the idea that, in a sense, Laszlo Toth's architecture is brutalized by his experience. I mean, everyone's been brutalized, and you could argue that even Guy Pearce is a victim of being brutalized by his own upbringing, and he has that story of how he, in a sense, punished his grandparents for the situation with his mum. His son is brutalized. Everyone's brutalized in different ways. Capitalism brutalizes, just as the Holocaust brutalized in a different way in Europe. And so I just very much felt we lost track. It became a building site for much of the film, rather than potentially a location that could have been much heavier and laden with sort of more metaphorical thought and feelings. I liked the idea that towards the end of the film, something happens to Guy Pearce's character, and we don't really know what. We don't really know where he goes or what happens to him after the accusation is levelled at him that he's raped Laszlo Toth. That's quite a nice sort of unfinished detail. Anyway, tell me what you think. Do you agree? Share your thoughts.